going to watch us in a little bit, you'll earn at least 1 or 2 extra internets today. It's the method of currency from digital exchanges. It predates cryptocurrency. You can earn internets for any kind of internet activity. I don't know. Just a thing. How you doing today, Terry?
The things that you come up with in that twisted, sick mind of yours that make no sense to any of the general population besides yourself.
There's an entire gallery of bad ideas that exist in the space between my ears.
Maybe a couple.
You want a couple of my bad ideas?
No. It's a couple of galleries.
A couple of galleries? Maybe
There's a couple of galleries. There's a whole museum. It's got 4 wings on it now.
Yeah. There's plenty of room for expansion. So anyway,
tickets are free though. Admission is free to this.
Admission is absolutely free. In fact, it may cost you a bit to come inside.
Yeah, there's a price to be paid to enter into this mission field.
Yeah. Oh. Hey, but maybe you'll be blessing humanity with that choice. And maybe the rest of humanity will improve by a decision to step inside to the labyrinth of bad ideas. Anyway.
Okay.
Today we're going to talk a little bit in just a few moments about one of the ongoing challenges of a work that deals in a public space with folks who are struggling and encountering levels of grief, growth, and opportunity that takes place in preaching. I have a lot of friends who serve their communities as first responders and police officers, and typically firemen in that role, in that job. What's going down is you meet someone when you're in that role, typically on their worst day. Like you don't get to see everyone's best day. When you preach, to a certain degree, your interactions with your congregation will change, where while you may not see everybody on their worst day, you're going to be a participant in everybody's worst day, one way or another. And those emotions can create some difficult challenges. And then as time goes on...
I really thought you were going to say that our interactions with the congregations are always our worst days. That's why I thought you were going.
Yeah. It might be our worst days. I don't know about theirs.
That's not true, though, either. I mean, those are our best days, aren't they? Really and truthfully.
Yeah,
that's the reason we still do this is because of that.
Right. You're going to get both. So you get to be there sometimes on their worst days and their best days. And it may be spread out over the course of a person's life. And you may move a couple times and re-interact with families that you've known for 30 years, 20 years. All of that creates a context where dealing with the what next can leave a wasteland or a minefield in your past. And so as I was kind of crafting different ideas going forward, this I think is something important. It's a regular subject. Terry and I have talked about it a little bit in the past, in a couple of different conversations. We've each written a little bit about it. And so we're just going to walk through it again today because I've got at least 2 goals with this in mind. Goal number 1 is refining and preparing your heart in a way that you're going to experience something. Like you're going to have emotions, consequences, settings where these kind of spiritual encounters can take place. And secondly, knowing about it should help us prevent it, but also perhaps overcome it quickly. Look, we are not these blocks of one single emotion. Every single human tragedy, human difficulty, spiritual consequence takes place within the space of the heart of a preacher. They're all there, to whatever degree that person's life is like that right now. Terry, before we get into any kind of discussion,
here's what hit me here's what hit me when you were talking about work days. First off, some of the most rewarding days I've had in this work was being there for people on their worst days. To be that support system for them, whether it be when they get bad news about illness or maybe lost a loved one, maybe it's a funeral. Here's the challenge, though. Here's the second part of it. Part of our job is to be there for people on their worst days. But where the bitterness comes for us is that a lot of times for preachers, when it's our worst day, there is nobody there. And honestly, this whole Do the Work program came out of a refostering of a friendship that hadn't been there for years. That really happened because you and I got reconnected in a part of our life we were both in a transition that in some ways we were bitter about. We became a sounding board support system for each other that then, I mean, our kids reconnected us, but that's what really, I think, connected us on a deeper level, was that you and I reconnected. They were not the exact same situations, but there was a lot of similarities. We were both looking to move close to the same amount of time. In fact, you had already found out the work there before I decided where to go. And in the long run, I'm just saying that a lot of times the people that are there for the preachers, and I think this is one of the things for the non-preachers to understand, a lot of times the people that are there for the preachers when it's their worst day is another preacher somewhere else. And that's what happens then is that's really hard for the preacher to not get bitter about.
Yeah.
And that's part of why there's this bitterness sometimes we carry with us. We feel, just to be honest, Phil, especially, if you go through like a transition like I did, you feel somewhat neglected by your family a little bit. Sometimes there are things you've agreed not to talk about to preserve the church, that then it's not their fault, that they don't understand. And sometimes they're upset with you and you can't explain everything because you've agreed for the preservation of that group not to explain everything. But you can't help but feel that way, and you also feel expendable. Like, of all the people that are allowed to, whenever a church is going to have a problem, the first guy that's going to end up leaving most of the time, whether he's asked or chooses to, is the preacher, to preserve the sanctity of the group. And what ends up happening there is that you've been this support system for this family. And when it comes time for you to need support, for whatever reason, a lot of times it's just not there. And that creates this bitterness. So, and look, you and I were talking before we went live. There's a lot of guys right now that we know, that you and I pray about, who I know are carrying this, and part of that is because they, through choice or force, they've left this work,
mm-hmm.
and they felt that expendability, that neglect. I mean, the reality is, I don't think people can see this, but for me, the best way to describe leaving a congregation for whatever reason is it's like a divorce. It's like you're leaving your family. And especially when you've been there, the longer you've been there, at least for me, Phil, I don't know about you, but the longer you've been there, the harder that is, because you've just got so many deep roots.
So a way to think about this is to kind of sort through it in this way. Terry and I have talked before, for those who preach, one of the goals that you should have kind of in your structure sideline is saying, I want to make sure that the environment that a guy who follows me comes into is better than the one that I arrived in. Yeah. Now, implicit in that is something that we don't admit when we make that statement. There will be a time where I'm not part of this environment. Now, that's easy to acknowledge when you don't want to be there. But when you don't want to leave, you've got to ask yourself, did I actually believe that I was doing that when I made it better for somebody else? Because here's the rub to that. If you're successful in making it better for somebody else when someone comes in and it's better for them when they got there than it was for you when you got there, that's a victory for all parties involved, even those who you may be disgruntled about in the short run, because you actually accomplished part of your mission.
But if you leave things better when you leave than when you got there, you're agreeing to take some pain with you,
Yeah,
regardless of the reason why you're leaving.
right.
And
And
part of that's not just the acceptance you're going to leave at some point, but the acceptance that if there's going to be pain involved, I'm going to carry that pain. I'm going to let them not carry that
and you've got to be totally okay with that. Like that's like on the preparatory side, absolutely okay with understanding that for everybody who preaches, you are a temporary servant for whatever time God has you there. The preacher may understand that. The preacher's family understands it less.
Yeah.
The church understands it less. But the more absolute you can get in that space, the more comfortable you are with seeing someone be successful down the road. Because you should be cheering for them to get to the corners that you couldn't reach, and be okay with it. Now, on a human level, I will tell you that that's always going to be a struggle. You can make some comparisons. You can think about the kid who gets cut from the team because their parents weren't connected to the coach as somebody else's parents. And that legitimately happens. It's not just about skill. It's about, do you fit with the team context? And if the parents aren't all on the same page, sometimes coach can be like, you're just as good as three other Johnnies down the road. I got three of you guys. And so I'm going to take the two that cause less problems. And I'm sorry, man, that's just how it is. It could be just in a general sense, not being invited to a party. All those feelings are the same space of feelings, same emotional challenges that also go through the same spiritual consequences. Terry talked about this as well. I'm talking about, divorce. If you're the victim of spiritual rebellion in a marriage, and you believe you're doing your best to maintain the marriage and your spouse is unfaithful to that commitment and that vow, but you have to clean up the mess afterwards when they leave, look, that's bitterness of a similar space. The scale changes. How elastic and how stretchy and how huge the mountain is might vary individual to individual, but you're really dealing with the same thing. It's all in that same developmental moral space. So one of the questions I think, go ahead, Terry.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that if you worked in sales, let's say, in a secular company, and you left, and that company you were with formerly struggled because you left for whatever reason, we're trained in our culture to kind of revel in that they're struggling without. It's very important as a preacher to realize that that's not how things are. We should never look at a group we lead, whatever the reason was, if they struggle and find pleasure in it. And I think that's the hard part, is to truly do this in a way that glorifies God and does the best for the kingdom. You really are agreeing to carry the pain in the relationship, and not just you're not agreeing to carry it by force. You're agreeing to willfully carry the pain, and you want to pray that the place you just left thrives without you. It's at greater heights than it was with you, which, by the way, is ego crushing.
Right.
In a worldly sense.
Here's the thing to think about, though. If the group fails because you left, then was it actually successful when you were there?
No, you did a bad work. It was a bad work.
You're just as accountable for the successes as you are for the failures, and learning when to step into a emotional space that says, I'm not the one who can help the group go forward. Like they need someone else. To me, it's a hard thing to do. Here's the thing that's part of this process, and it really gets into the core of Christianity, that preachers need to exemplify so that others can do so as well. Um, Steve McDonald was shot in the back of the head 3 times by a 15-year-old kid. It was during just a routine sweep of Central Park as a police officer. Because of that 15-year-old kid's momentary act of violence, he spent 28 years confined up to the time of the article I'm kind of digging from, confined to a wheelchair. Hasn't held his wife, hasn't played catch with his kid. But he did one thing that his ambulatory status didn't allow him to do: forgive that kid. He says, I forgave Shavad because the only thing worse than receiving a bullet in my spine would have been to nurture revenge in my heart. And that revenge and that bitterness would have affected his wife, his son, and others every single day. And I don't know about you, but I can't fathom the difficulty of 28 years of trying to then provide for your family, live, deal with the consequences of something you had nothing to do with. Because in the preacher space, you actually do play a part. However things play out, to a certain degree, the preacher is actually accountable for the environment they foster. So the question then is like, okay, how do we let go of that? How do we let go of the pain part in the forgiveness process, understanding you may not forget it and you maybe shouldn't forget it? Like there may be good reasons to make the memory have its place on the shelf. And that's something that's really a Christian principle that comes out in our work as laborers. My emphasized point for that is to recognize a truth about preachers. Preachers function in part on the basis of their ego. They believe, generally speaking, that they need to be doing the work that they're doing. So that affects us when we're in the pew, that affects us when we're at home and in the pulpit. Humility is the counterweight to that accepts the reality that they're not the only ones who need to be doing it. And that's just a really difficult thing to deal with in crisis moments without introspection or distance. The better you get at it, I will suggest to you, then actually you'll become incredibly more effective in your work. Like it's a leveraged opportunity. It creates a new plateau to work from.
But the work is not about us. I think that's the hard thing. Is you shouldn't just have humility when you leave a place. You know, you've got to develop that when things are good. Mm-hmm. I tell you, one of the things that, especially when you feel rejected, let's say you've been asked to leave. One of the things that I recognized in that time of my life was just to look through the story of the Bible and just see how many of God's servants were rejected. And the list is lengthy when you start looking at it. How I can't turn up my volume, but Phil can. The list is lengthy of people who were rejected. And that rejection does not define those individuals, and I think that's the key to that. It has to be
stood in that sense, and that may be better. I changed mics. Hopefully, that's better.
Significantly so.
Yeah, I think my default settings were betraying me. But the other thing is, I'll say, Phil, I think it's somewhat easier for me to recover when I go somewhere else, and for lack of a better term, I have a new family that helps heal me. I will say I do, I think worry's the wrong word, but I'm concerned for our brethren that allow this bitterness to push them out of the work. Because I think from my perspective, would be harder for me to heal having left that all behind. That's just how I feel about myself. And one of the things that allows you to do, besides the humility, is to cling to the work you have in front of you, because that if you'll cling to the work, that's what heals you the most. At least that's what's healed me the most, is just recognizing I don't have time to dwell in the bitterness. I can illustrate this way. When I was 16 years old, my dad died in a car accident. It was tragic. It was sudden. It was unexpected. My mom, who at the time was working, but it was supplemental income, suddenly had 2 kids, one in college and a teenage son who was struggling to take care of. She didn't have time to she didn't have time to sit back in her grief and bitterness, and stop life. She had to find a job. She also had to make the choice for us that was necessary at the time, looking back, to relocate to a place that would be better for us, especially me as a young teenager. Those are a lot of quick changes, and I'm saying within 4 months we moved houses. It was that fast. Moved towns, moved states, because the work she had now inherited of single parenting was too great to let go, because of, and just sit back and be dormant in her bitterness and grief. And so I think one of the things is to be humble, to realize it's about God. And my suggestion to guys that give up full-time work would be to still immerse yourself in what we would simply call church work.
Yeah.
Wherever you find yourself, teach classes, get involved, do some studies. That is part of, for me, is the overcoming part for me, Phil, to remind myself that all of this was about God. It wasn't about Terry Francis. It wasn't about Terry's time at New Hope or Hillview or East Shelby. This was all about God, and it's still about God, regardless of where I'm at or what I'm doing today. It's still about God, and you got to get back to that. And part of me understanding it's all about God is actually working for the Lord. And that's got to be your mindset, whether you're in the pulpit or out as a full-time evangelist, to overcome this.
So there's a book I read a few years ago entitled How to Beat Burnout. It was probably about 10, 15 years ago. And there's 5 key elements that repeat through many of the books of the same kind. Like, they're just basic ideas to help really process bitterness, pulpit focused bitterness in particular for us right now, is to recognize, number 1, you've got to understand improper motives or jealousy as it drives your own behavior. That this is a challenge for preachers. You think about it, it's not just preacher space, but here's the illustration. You see a different person in a profession, like, say, an attorney, who is just so much better than everybody else. It's easy in that context to understand how somebody would be jealous of that person's skill. When you were in college, there were some folks who were just quicker to get the subject and to understand the material. Or here's, and I'll put it right in the space. Think about the guy who gets asked to do a lot of meetings. Because whoever that is probably not you. Just, I know it's not Terry and I. And I say for me, it's not me. And so it's easy for the preacher then to go, well, I do good work. I work really hard at what I do. Why are they not calling for me? Or you see someone who is effective and oversees work, Man, they're always going somewhere. Do you know how much work goes in doing overseas work? Um, I've made a few trips overseas over to the Philippines. Man, to do a 2-3 week trip to the Philippines is a 6 months commitment. And it's a year to a year and a half commitment if you're going to talk about the fundraising side. Um, that's a lot. And it takes a lot of time from your family and all the other obligations to go with it. Um, and once you're there, it's not a praiseworthy endeavor in the sense of, oh, they're all lauding your success. It's 3 weeks of super hard work on top of the 6 months to a year and a half before that. So our motives or our jealousy often exist in a space that's actually make believe. We believe that we should be able to steal their success and make it our own, but not have to do the work to get there. Look, there's reasons why guys are good in certain contexts. Their skills in that particular venue are tremendous. And there's no space for jealousy in there. There's just no room for it. And don't think that those who do a lot of meetings don't get jealous. Some of them get jealous of the guys who don't do a lot of meetings.
I got to tell you, you say that one year I had 9 meetings and I finally arrived. It wasn't long after that I thought, I don't want to ever do 9 meetings again.
Yeah.
Like it was.
I'm not sure not sure I like the room I arrived in.
Yeah.
Can I go down 2 floors, please?
Yeah, I cut it back. I cut it way back because I had young kids at home and it was unfair to my family. And now, COVID's changed everything, but I've cut it back too because I have an elderly parent that I'm a caretaker for. So changes everything. But yeah, it's interesting. There is jealousy on every side. There's you're going to find that anywhere.
Yeah. The reality is there is a short-term easy fix, like Paul talks, easy fix to that problem, to say no. Yeah. The reality is the minute you start saying no, guess people never do again.
They don't ask.
They don't ask the second time.
Yeah.
And congregations, churches get into a cycle where they tend to invite the same guys back. Doesn't matter who they are, how much you try to push them out of that comfort zone. They got a list of 10 guys they trust.
Yeah.
And there's some positives to that. There's some questions you might want to ask as to, is that the best choice?
Hal makes a great comment, man. That just popped up. That we complain that others don't value what we do, when in truth we often don't value it ourselves. And that is so true. One of the things when I was working with young guys was to get them to understand that what they do is important and has great value, and to treat it with the respect it is worthy of. And I think sometimes we struggle to do that. I can tell you as an early young preacher, here's a good example of that. I enjoyed my flexibility when I was young and dumb. And I enjoyed being able not to have to work every day if I had things done. I could just do what I wanted to. And then when other people acted like I didn't really work a real job, it made me mad. And then one day I realized, with the help of somebody else who said, well, you don't treat it like a real job. So the way you do the work does matter. Okay. So I think that's important as the host, aka Phil Martin, just starts randomly spouting off.
I thought I might forget my notes.
Ways we don't value the work.
Yeah, this is all stuff like these are those 5 causes of burnout that I thought I put up there before I forgot.
By the way, I think listen, I'm going to say this. This work isn't for everybody. I mean, we talked about earlier, you're going to go into this saying that you're agreeing to take the pain and take the suffering. It may not be for you if that's something that you're not willing to carry. And that's not meant to be harsh. It just is what it is, Phil.
Right. Here's a way to think about it. At one point, a different Phil Martin was the strongest man competitor. Not this Phil Martin, but someone with the exact same name. And dude was a beast. Just power machine.
Is this when you were doing the Highland Games?
Yeah, yeah. Really funny guy too. Like he had a
Tossing
great sense
telephone
of humor.
poles?
Yeah, he was doing the caber toss. I would win the drum major competitions, and he would win the strongman competitions, and so we would go accept each other's awards all the time. People would just be like, "What? That doesn't make any sense." It was a good times. But he was the first one who had said to me something I hear often now. Abs exist on people who don't eat enough. But if you want to friend a strong man, I can tell you where to find one, and that's in the gym. And so he would work out like a beast, and I'd go try to work out with him every once in a while. And like basically, I would need 3 of me to lift whatever he was doing because he was willing to commit himself to the task of carrying the load. And that also included eating at a volume that was just outside the norm. Like amount of calories that Phil Martin took in, there's a lot of calories, but that's like Michael Phelps level category calories.
Dude, this is a page out of my book. The soccer player today got up 30 minutes earlier because now they have real practices after school, and she had to pack an actual lunch. Those are her terms. To have enough calories to get through practice. Because when you're doing that kind of stuff, you know this from what the story's sharing, it's dedication in a lot more ways than you realize.
And there's a level of discipline that takes place in that context that you've accepted in order to get the result. And when you preach, you're doing part of that. Here's that second cause, and I dropped it up there earlier. We often have a wrong response to what irritates us, if not called conditional love at times. It's like the spouse who says, I would love you more if only. Look, that doesn't work that way. And bitterness festers when that's the sore you pick at. That's not going to be healthy in your work. If you're like, those people would just try harder. Look, I guarantee you they're trying as hard as they can for the level of faith that they have and the difficulty of the message that you're preaching. Because there's just as much of a possibility that their lack of response is due to your lack of clarity, subject selection, or whatever else God has on the table at the moment. And you've got to be okay with that middle space. And like Bob was talking about, you hang out with preachers long enough, you're going to see some tremendously spread abilities in all those guys. And you're going to find out that some people are just really good at things that you didn't even know were things that are right in the work of preachers. I'll give you an example about that. If someone were to come to me in the Mid-Tennessee area and say, hey, who should do a wedding? Sean Bain. I've been to a lot of weddings by a lot of different preachers. If you want to tell me, find a preacher who does a great job at a wedding ceremony, Sean Bain. 100%. Because he's good at it. For all the reasons someone can be good at it. And I think that's just a powerful recognition that that's okay. You don't have to have that conditional mindset that if the other party got on my level, then we would just be okay. No, like your role at times in life is to pull the person to your level, not to expect them to somehow grow to your height on their own or get down on theirs. And so part of that is in that thing. And this is a tie into the lifting thing that we just talked a second ago. And that discipline is when things are difficult, adversity isn't bad. Just because it's hard doesn't mean that this is the worst moment ever. Like hard things are good things.
Well, some of your greatest growth happens because of adversity.
Yep.
Prosperity rarely grows us. If you think about it.
Yeah. Think about this, and this is something I think is very clear. I spent a lot of time reaching out to friends that I've gone to school with, I've worshiped with in the past, who have, as some might say, deconstructed their faith or abandoned their faith. or changed how they see God or worship. And I ask them tons of what I consider non-judgmental questions because I want to know why. I want to know how. I want to understand. And almost uniformly, the rationale for significant movement in a person's faith, or more particularly, how they practice their faith, has little to do with doctrine, little to do with standards. It either is as simple as there was something I wanted to do that would be unacceptable with the group that I was part of, or they would say I was not treated well, but in reality, the relationship broke down. Like it's usually a two-way street, but the person on the outside feels the pressure higher. They feel that pressure cooker more because they have no one to support them on the other end of that relationship. Those two reasons are why people break those relationships. That's what, and it's misplaced strife. The strife isn't being dealt with properly. Further, think about communities where there are 3 churches where the preachers all preach the same thing, get together all the time, but no way are those families going to worship together. And I'll speak plainly here, and Bob, you can close your ears for this and put your head over your ears. When Terry and I were in Bowling Green, there was no way we could arrange a singing and invite everybody from East Side and everybody from Parkway, not the college kids, everybody, and not have a problem. Would that be a fair recollection there, possibly?
We probably lived in one of the most divisive periods of time for that city between their churches.
It's possible.
It's just it is what it is, and you couldn't.
If we really wanted to amp it up, we could have invited folks from the black church too.
Lines are immediately drawn on friendships to a degree based on where you went to church. Sadly. So, yeah.
There was a group of Christians there. I think this was after you started preaching. Eddie Legg and a few others were arranging Bible studies on the campus of Western. And I was part of the prep session for the very last one of those. We actually didn't get to have it because of issues like this. A few other issues came up on a personal level with some of the participants, but this is the last one, and this is the best one to use early. But it's the one that we deal with the most. The inability to forgive. I will suggest to you, and Ephesians 4 ties this together, that an unforgiving spirit really is something that should never be part of the institutionalized process of your preaching. I'm done with those people. I'll never go back there. Should never be something that is part of your dialogue. It's just not healthy. And here's something to think about on the practical side of that. A friend told me something. He's like, when you leave a place, you should already be scheduled for return gospel meetings. Sometimes that's not practical, but you should think about your relationship in a way that it's not if that happens, it's when that happens. And it's going to be okay. Like, you should be able to do that. Now, people get involved. And when people are involved, you don't have that perfection. But that's a way to think about it. And if you're part of a group, you should be able to invite all those former preachers back in. If they're still preaching and teaching and faithful, say, it's going to be good. Be great. And that's a way to maintain a relationship that doesn't need to be strained. In the end, that's probably going to be better for all parties involved.
Yeah.
And these are things that all actually exist now in the space of the heart of just a preacher. A guy who wants to do good struggles with these kind of concepts all the time. And in a practical way, we don't always process and struggle with them in the best way.
Well, the reality is these are the same things that everybody struggles with.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, preachers are just people like everybody else, with their flaws, with their mistakes, with their emotional responses, with their need for forgiveness and healing, all those things. We're just like everybody else.
Yeah. And it's going to be okay. Terry and I have friends who exist across the spectrum of talent levels, academically, effectiveness, um, financially, experiences. I will say for me, I have found that I am better off when I learn to reach out to those who have expertise that I don't have. And that includes all these old emotional areas too. A man I have a lot of respect for when I first started preaching, had retired from preaching in the area where I was doing my second work. And he had kept this book for years. And it was all dialogues of conversations with other preachers and teachers. And some of it was pretty rough stuff. When I asked him, I go, why do you keep that log? He says, I started this log because I was, in essence, wanting to make sure that I had a record of people who had wronged me. He said, but I changed the log as I got older and I grew up a little bit. And it became a log of those I had wronged and what I had learned from it. And when I recognized that I had wronged someone, I wrote it down and I went to them. And I said, why are you telling me about this? He says, because I wrote your name in the book. And he was 40 years older than me at that point, probably 50 years older than me at that point. And he says, I want to work it out. It took a long time for me to process the value of that part. I've never kept a logbook like that. That's not my thing. But the principle behind it is something that I have gotten better at. I think I've gotten to be more mindful of it every day over the last 5 or 10 years than I ever was in my first 5 or 10 years. And I think it's something that as preachers, we really ought to be doing better at. I think that's for young guys who maybe have been forced to move from a place they loved and they've only been there a year or two. Been there. It's going to be okay. One of the families from that group that I was with there just a little while, as Clark Duggar said, it was an extended gospel meeting. Serves as an elder in a church near that area. Great guy. Just talked to someone who said, I can't think of a finer couple of elders to go work with than the two of those three elders in that church. And they were through one of the roughest experiences that I had gone through as a young preacher. And I know they've grown from it too. So, I mean, like all this stuff gets better. It's hard to appreciate it when you're young. Any last thoughts, Terry? We kind of a little bit past our
not a little bit.
stamp.
You drove right through the wall. You were just gone through it.
Yeah, I was all Steve Rogers by it. You're over there like Bruce Banner and go, I don't know. You just blew past his timestamp. There's an old man sitting on a bench somewhere.
Well, I knew we were in trouble when, 3 minutes before we were supposed to end, you dump your 5 points and are convicted that you have to share all 5 of them. So it was like,
hey man, I wrote them down.
It's the guy that did the 20-minute introduction to the sermon, has 10 minutes left, but he's going to get those 4 points out anyway. That's where we were. So, just hope, as Colton said, listen. I know that bitterness, especially for some guys that have left the work, especially, I think it's harder. I know it's tough. I just pray that you can move past that and that you can focus on God. One thing we didn't touch, and maybe it's another time, really hard on the family in those cases. I know for me personally, Phil, and maybe for you too, I recovered quicker than the family did in some ways. Just depends on the person.
It's kind of uneven. It's uneven.
Yeah.
And it's never completing itself in the ways you think it will.
Yeah. So, like I said, just and a closing word to people that aren't preachers that may run across this. just realize that the guys that work with you, they are people too. They need healing. They need that love. That the same things that you want, they need, and you can provide that for them.
Mm-hmm.
And I would encourage you to do so.
Right. Functional and fundamental to the work of preaching and the work of shepherding and the work of leading a home is helping people hear it's going to be okay and understand it's going to be okay. That starts in the heart of the preacher.
Yeah.
When you say it's going to be okay, you've got to believe it's going to be okay.
When you got to act like it is.
Yeah. And it is. It just will be different. Part of the reason behind that, in '97, I spent a little time in St. Croix in Barbados working with Talberg and the church there in a unstructured internship. It's hard to call it an internship when basically you're just dumped out there and said, do some work. Tol's a great guy. Dan's great woman. They do good work. But back then, you didn't have the internets in the way that we do now. You didn't have phones with cameras. So, you just got postcards of things. And you think about now, like, how many of us would buy a postcard to memorialize a thing? No, we wouldn't. We'd go use our phone or a camera and take a picture of it. Just because it changes doesn't mean it's worse. It may actually be better. And moving into a new space could actually be incredibly rewarding. You may grow and do things you never thought you ever would. And our lives are like that. And so if we can help you grow, if we can be a servant to you, hey, let us know. We're happy to help. There's a lot of other guys who are preaching that need someone to care about them. Go care about somebody today. Go check in on them. Ask them how they're doing. Say, hey. And if you got shepherds and elders that are part of your local church, check on them. Tell them that you appreciate their work. Because I'll tell you, for deacons and elders, how often do they get praised? We love having them. No business meetings. Don't have to go with those hard conversations. When's the last time you thanked them for doing that work? Especially those who preach. Take care, everyone. Have a great day.